Hello, Internet. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, as we go into a reaction slash response to the legendary Professor Dungeon Master over on Dungeon Craft. He has been doing some coverage of Hasbro, Wizards, and D&D and different decisions they've made. Most of what he has to say, I typically agree with. And I believe that he's correct on a lot of things. But there's one thing that he does that you also see others like the OGGM do that I just don't actually put, pun intended, as much stock in, is they talk about the Hasbro stock price. And while Wizards is a substantial part of the Hasbro plan moving forward, and it does represent a nice big chunk, Dungeons and Dragons itself is really such a small part of the Hasbro portfolio that it's so many steps removed from the investor that D&D decisions are not what's. I don't really see the correlation for them driving the Hasbro stock price. Hasbro stock is more being driven by just you have a hyperinflation situation in the economy right now, and you also have a stock market that is recovering from really a major disruption in the fact that not just from the COVID-19 helicopter money craziness that went on, but here in the past several years, you've seen a major shift. For the past 20 years, anything that had the word tech attached to it was like gold. It didn't matter. You didn't have to vet or prove anything. The stock would shoot up. There was a plague of what they call zombie corporations, which were literally these companies that never made any profit, that just kind of ambled along on investor money, growing up and then being losing money all the time, and then being sold off in IPOs and making people filthy rich. Like, for instance, Uber. Uber was wildly unprofitable for a very, very long time, but the stock price was huge because it was this platform that was so useful. Twitter is another example. Twitter was never profitable. Twitter was never something that produced anything or made any money, but there was value there and data collection and various other means that just made it appear valuable. And what you've got is all these things coming together. And when you have a hyperinflationary bubble and you have a unsettled economy, investors know that the first thing that goes out the window is your entertainment and your incidentals and your creature comforts and your luxury purchases. And that includes things like toys, games, and other, like I said, other entertainment things. You scale back to the stuff that is less volatile. And really, we've seen the world take a hard turn towards things like video games and whatnot, but more importantly, things that can be like easily downloaded and brought into your house, as opposed to things that actually have a physical medium to them. Back in my day, and when I was a kid, we had toy boxes. I had a toy box. My little brother had a toy box. Some of us had 2 or 3 toy boxes. And you would open up this huge Foot Locker chest at the end of your bed, and it's filled to the top with action figures and tanks and cars and trucks and planes and all this stuff. These days, you walk into a kid's room and you see a Nintendo Switch and an iPad, and that's about it. You don't see, you might see 1 or 2 toys. You don't see a chest full of action figures anymore. And Hasbro, being a monolithic corporation, but everything about them is in this physical entertainment medium space. That's part of the reason why they're pushing so hard to move Dungeons and Dragons digital, is to try and make it like that. But I don't see Dungeons and Dragons decisions as being the thing that is really pushing the stock prices here, like Professor DM and some others do. But let's hear what he has to say. I'm interested in the rest of the situation, and we'll go ahead and get my thoughts on that, and then hopefully get your thoughts in the comments below.
Deathbringer here. Subscribe so you never miss an upload.
Last week, I did a video on how Hasbro Wizards was planning to turn D&D into a monopoly, but I may have spoken too soon. At the time of this taping, it is 4 o'clock on Friday, and Hasbro closed at $43.11, at one point going as low as $42.69. I believe that's a 5-year low, down from a high of 121 in 2019. And this is on an up day and week for U.S. markets. But how will this impact D&D and other tabletop role-playing games? That's what I'm talking about today, and I'm Professor Dungeon Master. And here we talk about gaming industry news, as well as Ravenloft, Warhammer, painting, rules-light games, old-school games, and RPGs in general. So watch those videos too. So about a week ago, I was on Roll for Combat with Steven Glicker, and if you don't know that show, it's like the 60 minutes of the role-playing game industry. And we broke down Hasbro's latest earnings report, and there's a link to that below. Also below, you'll find a link to Roll for Combat's latest Kickstarter, Battle Zoo Ancestries Year of Legends. 13 new playable races you won't get anywhere else. Extensively developed lore, fully developed cultural insights, ancestral feats, new backgrounds, 50 tokens depicting the race in a variety of character options, and it's designed for both Pathfinder 2e and 5e. Every month you'll receive a new legendary race delivered to your email as a PDF or automatically unlocked in your Foundry module, or both. And if you click on the Kickstarter link, you can check out how those animated tokens work. Full disclosure, Steven didn't pay for that spot. He's a friend of the channel. Also, I am not a shareholder of Hasbro, nor am I shorting the stock. And you should not take financial advice from a YouTube dungeon master.
That should be painfully obvious. Don't take your stock advice. But of course, he hadn't really given so many stock tips here. There's a lot of stuff in there that sounds like it matters more than it does, like Hasbro being down on a week that's up for stock, being at a 5-year low, and this sort of thing. You'll notice that the peaks were around the times you have stuff like Stranger Things coming out, and you've got a renewed interest in it. And also 2019 rolling into 2020. 2019, we were coming through an extremely powerful and potent economy with all kinds of craziness happening in the stock world, driving all kinds of crazy stocks up. I mean, we all remember GameStop, AMC, all these the Wall Street bros pushes shorting crazy stocks and that sort of thing, a crypto boom and all this other stuff. You're talking about an incredibly powerful economy rolling in 2019 into 2020. And when you have that provides, you're talking low interest rates, you're talking easy money, you're talking quick investments and quick cash, which frees up a lot of money for things like role-playing games and toys and collectibles and Magic the Gathering cards and stuff like that. Then you roll through into an economy that is tailor-made to make people stop buying that stuff anyway, and you couple it with them pissing off large portions of the player base. The massive plummet in stock and the continued downtrend is not something that is really unexpected or out of the ordinary. And it's just not, you're not going to see that go away. It's also not going to change the idea that D&D or that Wizards Hasbro is trying to make a monopoly. Of course they're trying to make a monopoly. Cornering the market and growing to the largest market share possible is what companies are supposed to do. But that said, a monopoly in the role-playing world, like the role-playing, a lot of people don't understand this. The role-playing game segment is such a tiny, tiny segment of the economy that it's not even really calculated on its own. When you look at the reports and whatnot that that investors in this space would look at when determining buying stock, things like Dungeons and Dragons are lumped into board games and and other games. Like they don't even have their own segment to monopolize. So we're talking about them pushing to maintain dominance in a very, very small sector. Not the kind of thing that generally is going to make massive swings in the stock price of a company with a more diverse portfolio.
With that out of the way, I was on Roll for Combat about a week ago, and these are the highlights. Hasbro quarterly net revenue fell to $1.5 billion, missing estimates of $1.64 billion. Hasbro's core toy business dropped a whopping 18%. They sold E1 for $500 million after buying it 4 years ago for $4 billion. A $3.5 billion loss, and Hasbro warned they're facing a bleak holiday season. On the positive side, the digital and licensed gaming revenue grew 40% on strong demand for its Monopoly Go and Baldur's Gate 3 games. Glicker observed for the year 2023, Wizards tabletop gaming was up 14% for the quarter, but that includes Magic and D&D. Magic and D&D are always combined in these statements, and Magic is up a huge amount due to Lord of the Rings. Simple math says Magic is way up, yet Hasbro is barely breaking even, and that means D&D is losing market share. But there are other troubling signs for D&D. Let's talk book sales. As I pointed out in a recent episode, they are trending downward. Yes, 5e is at the end of its life cycle, and new core books are coming next year, but Wizards has made it clear that this is not a new edition. This is the forever stamp edition of D&D. So for whatever reason, recent releases have not connected with the audience.
Well, part of the reason recent releases haven't connected is for a couple of reasons. One is they do keep pissing in their own Cheerios. Wizards almost goes out of their way to piss off and alienate sections of their own fan base, which is going to cause a drop. But the other thing is that, let's face it, especially when you're talking about physical books, and really with Wizards, it doesn't make that much of a difference because they're the same price as far as I know. These are not cheap things. These are, you're not going to impulse buy a set of books. And it's like when you're talking about, like in 2019, 2020, you're on Stranger Things hype, you're on the roll, Critical Role is pushing things forward. You got a lot of new people coming into the hobby that are buying up the core books. But then also, you're running on a strong economy with cheap money. So if I want to spend 40, 50, 60 bucks on that book that they just released, hell, why not? Let's just make an impulse purchase. That isn't the case anymore of the overall economy. And with a decline in quality, which even the strong D&D supporting fan base has been pointing out, that you've started to have a tremendous drop in quality when you look at things like Planescape, where there's just not very much meat on the bone for these books that are coming out. My $30 could be spent, or my 60 bucks. I could spend 60 bucks and get a Planescape book that does jack of all shit for me and adds nothing to my 5e game if I'm a 5e player. Or I could buy a video game that I could play for 900 hours. I could buy, I could download a Gran Turismo game and race cars all over the place on my computer or on my PlayStation, or any number of other things I could do with that 60 bucks. That's way better than, say, the Planescape book. And you saw a lot of this coming at the end of 3.5 as well. You were going into the Great Recession, rolling into, the better part of a decade of depression at the end of the 2000s, and the books for 3.5 were getting less and less and less good, especially as 4E was coming around. So it became a decision of, is this really worth the money I'm going to spend on it? And chances are it's probably no.
Then there's the disastrous launch of the Book of Many Things. The Book of Many Things was supposed to be released simultaneously with a physical deck of many things, but they misprinted the cards. Some of the cardboard was warped, and some of the cards were cut to the wrong size. The company that makes Magic the Gathering was unable to produce a deck of cards. Back in August, Hasbro took a $25 million write-down for the D&D movie. That movie was supposed to bring in a wave of new younger fans, but that did not materialize. And clearly, the OGL scandal has had an impact a large chunk of Angry fans canceled their D&D Beyond subscriptions and have not renewed. But where did they go? Pathfinder 2 sold out its entire print run. Dungeon Crawl Classics has sold over 100,000 copies. Tales of the Valiant and Shadowdark raised over $1 million on Kickstarter. D&D Shorts Guide to the Yokai Realms raised $3 million. Lots of former fans are turning elsewhere for their RPG fix. And personally, I think that's a good thing. I want to see newer games and new ideas and innovative mechanics that push the hobby in a new direction. Look, there's nothing wrong with D&D. It's like a Big Mac. I enjoy it once in a while, but I don't want to eat it every night. And frankly, there are so many games that deserve attention because they are better made and higher quality. And competition drives quality. Smaller game companies need to work harder and offer more because they're competing with Wizards of the Coast. And if Wizards wants to compete, they need to refocus on the consumer and make better products. At least that's what they should do. What they're going to do is focus on turning D&D into a subscriber-based digital experience. Whenever I bring this up, I get accused of fear-mongering. But did you check out the new Chains of Asmodeus? It's almost 300 pages long. The reviews are great, but it's only available in PDF. No print version available. They're selling the PDF at $30, which is what I bought many of my D&D hardcovers for. With a PDF, you don't have to worry about paper, ink, storage, distribution, borders, or tariffs. Yeah, they'll still be core books, but they'll be for collectors. Casual fans like the convenience of looking up rules on their phones. They didn't hire a digital expert from Microsoft to print books. They are all in on that VTT. They think
Well, yeah, they're definitely all in on digital. They're all in on VTT. And they are all in on this because it's a lot easier to stomach spending $4 and $5 a month and then the occasional $30 than it is to stomach dropping $60, $70 every time a book comes out. Because let's face it, especially in America, most people are not paying attention to their finances. And if it's not within the next 30 days, it's not something they're thinking about. Nobody's going to save their $5 a month so that when the $60 book comes out, they can go out and buy it and it not really disrupt their life at all. They need something. They basically need a payment plan. And like I was saying before, we've moved to an age of I want it now. I don't want to wait for it to ship. I get irritated when Amazon Prime, that's supposed to be 2-day shipping, is going to take 3 or 4 days because of some sort of delay, and pipe it directly into my TV, pipe it directly into my computer, and quick download. Even video games, it's like you don't go to a GameStop or whatever the less evil version of GameStop is that you go to buy a physical copy of a video game at. You don't go there anymore. You download the stupid thing from the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Market or whatever the hell they have. And they're just trying to fit into that scheme. And it's going that way, and it's going to be going that way. Because let's be honest, how many times have you bought a new game, a new TTRPG or something off, say, Drive-Thru RPG, and you just downloaded the PDF? Half the time, even if you wanted a physical copy, you downloaded the PDF and you printed it yourself because you didn't feel like waiting on the book or something of that nature. Happens all the time. And then the numbers that he points out, Pathfinder 2 sold out its entire run, and all these small games getting these big Kickstarters and stuff. I hate to say it, but $1 million Kickstarter is a lot smaller than what it sounds like. It really, really is. It's not small. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's not a tiny, tiny thing. But $1 million Kickstarter is the kind of thing that, especially if it's done over a long period of time, like 6-7 months, something of that nature, you can get a tiny little bit from a lot of people to get there relatively quickly. You get 100,000 people to chip in $10. There you go. You're at your $1 million. And let's keep in mind, 100,000 people is less than 1% of the population. Less than 1 in 100 people in this country. So, and that's to say nothing of like the whales with disposable income, friends and family, people who are chipping in, $100 here, $50 there, subscribe to a special Patreon or something like that, where they're literally having $2-3 a month pulled out. And by the time it's all said and done, they've chipped in $80-90. These kind of things are all stuff that can happen there. Basically prepaying for the book. So there's a lot more factors in this than what's going on there. But of course they're going digital because it's cheaper, it's easier to produce, it's more accessible, and it fits into the modern demand.
If they don't innovate, they're going to go the way of Kodak. But to them, innovation means going digital. Kids' toys are being replaced by this, so it makes sense that Hasbro thinks this is the future of D&D. They see the numbers for Digital Magic and Monopoly, and they say, look, people enjoy this experience better. They like playing games on a phone or a tablet more than they do in person. The problem is those games are fundamentally a different experience than Dungeons & Dragons and role-playing games. Magic Arena is cool because you could play on a lunch break or between classes. Digital Monopoly is cool because you can play against a computer or other players. It counts the money and you don't have to fight with your family. And I'm not hating on VTTs. I understand that some people can't find other people to play with or want to reconnect with their friends, and that's the only way they can do it. And I play on VTTs myself. I just prefer the in-person experience. And when I talk to people who play VTTs regularly, they seem to echo this sentiment. It's always like, well, I'd like to play in person, but I can't, so I use a VTT. I'm sure they're out there, but I've never met someone who said that they preferred to play with a VTT because it was a superior experience to playing in person.
I actually have heard that from quite a lot of people, especially newer and younger players. The fact that it calculates everything for them, the fact that the math isn't there, the rules are baked in, the fact that you've got access to all the different, ease of maps and tokens and miniature play and that sort of thing. I've definitely heard a lot. As a matter of fact, I've heard of a lot of newer players who actually supplement their in-person games with their laptops out and a VTT. I personally think that one of the biggest appeals of a tabletop role-playing game is the personal social aspect of it, of everybody getting together, potluck dinner, that sort of thing. But it's also, I think that you lose a fundamental element by going to a VTT in the fact that, like I said, the rules are plugged in, the math is done and all that stuff for you. But what you really need to focus on is the core element that makes TTRPGs so much better and so much more versatile than, say, a video game, is the fact that that DM is there right there to make rules adjustments and changes on the fly to make it perfectly fit the situation, as opposed to having to rely on one size fits all rules that are built into a book. To have that minute ground level control over the entire experience. Now, he said it perfectly. It's something I mentioned earlier in this video. This phone has replaced kids' toys. And at the end of the day, Hasbro's not wrong. All right. I am not a D&D customer anymore. I am not a Wizards customer. They repeatedly slap my values in the face. They repeatedly insult me and people who think like me and feel like me and believe like me. And they don't provide, they're bastardizing the very things that I think make the product special in the first place. They have been progressively ruining their game, in my opinion. However, I'm not who they're trying to appeal to. They're trying to appeal to the people who are going to buy into that. They don't care about me because my homebrew, write it yourself, make my own terrain, make my own miniature self is not generating money for them. Me boycotting them represents nothing. So it's the same thing here. We're not the target. They don't care about us because we're not the whales that they're hunting for. They want the person who's going to pay $5-6 a month and not think about it because it's just another $5-6 a month on top of everything else in their life that they pay $5-6 for.
I've also noticed the VTT sessions tend to be a little shorter. Like, I feel fatigued after 2 hours of looking at a screen. I think a lot of people spend all day looking at a computer and they play TTRPGs so they can get away from the screen. It's the equivalent of getting outside and touching grass. Plus, my VTT friends don't bring me Doritos and cookies. But that will not stop Wizards from going ahead with their plans for a digital D&D. Ever since Diablo, no, probably since Adventure, there have been people who thought D&D would somehow be improved if only it were a video game. That's why 4E played the way it did. It was a response to the popularity of Warcraft. That's when language like tanks and blasters, boss monsters, and healing surges entered the D&D lexicon. I've heard it over and over. Wouldn't it be cool if you could play D&D in virtual reality and actually swing a sword and fight dragons? Oh, because those headsets make me sick, and I don't want to stare at a digital town or a digital dungeon environment. True story. I actually met Gary Gygax a couple of times, and we talked game design, and I was really into LARPing at the time. I ran LARPs with dozens and dozens of people at them, and my girlfriend hated LARPing, but liked tabletop role-playing games. So she asked Gary, "What do you think of LARPs?" And he said, and I quote, "I think it's just a bunch of people standing around shooting the breeze." And I said, "But isn't it more immersive?" And he said, "No, because you can't have the ceiling fall on you." What he meant is LARPs have limitations based on physical space. Digital
Absolutely 100% right. I think LARPing is the dumbest thing on the planet. I think it's absolutely foolish and stupid. It's just I don't see the appeal of running around dressed in a dress with a star-covered hat, throwing a cardboard lightning bolt at somebody. This just seems asinine to me. It also defeats the entire purpose because, like Gary said, because the roof can't fall on you. You cannot. I don't care if you have a Hollywood budget. You cannot have a LARP that is anywhere near as immersive as somebody's imagination. There is no CGI. There is no set design. There is nothing you can do. Elon Musk could make Dungeons and Dragons LARP world, and it will never measure up to your imagination.
games have limits based on the designer's parameters. No matter how immersive you try to make a video game, no matter how big or interactive your world, it still has limits. It's like the Truman Show. Go far enough and eventually you hit the wall. TTRPGs are about not having limits and interacting as humans. When you play a tabletop game, a good one, the game master doesn't create the world. The players and the game master work together to create that world, and it emerges naturally through play. That does not happen even in the best video game. You're always playing the designer's world. I'm not sure the VTT is being spearheaded by people who understand what tabletop games do. Board games, tabletop games, miniature war games, video games, and LARPs are all games, but they all do very different things. Designer needs to understand what makes that type of game cool. I'm not sure they get it, but I'm not sure it's going to matter because that's what they're doing. They're doubling down. It's full steam ahead on the digital train. And who knows, maybe it'll work and turn D&D into the billion-dollar digital brand Hasbro wants it to be. Meanwhile, this has opened up a golden opportunity for independent creators. These smaller companies have less overhead, fewer employees, lower expenses, and are offering more unique, higher quality, more interesting stuff. Regardless of what happens to Hasbro, consumers are going to get more and better games, and that's good for everyone. At least that's what I think. What do you think? Share in the comments below.
Okay, so I agree with a lot of that largely, especially towards the end. It does open up for a lot more. I think that there's no question about it. The game designers at WOTC have no clue what makes a TTRPG special, or if they do, they ignore it because it doesn't fit in with what they need. And I'm gonna say something that kind of is a defense of Wizards of the Coast here. Once again, I'm not their customer anymore. None of us are their customer anymore. If you're in the tabletop role-playing game space and you understand things like how Rule Zero gives a limitless quality to the game that, as Professor Dungeon Master put it, takes us out of the Truman Show, takes us out of the limits of all these other gaming mediums. But then again, more and more we see players want those limitations put on them. They say they don't, but by the way they talk about rules, by the way they talk about mechanics, by the way they talk about this class, that class, et cetera, by the way they want things, the way they push to have official documents or official books come out, adding whatever they want to the game. They want limitations. They want things to be, they want to be told it exists in the game. And it probably will work. Eventually it will work as they move into that player base and continue to push that player base. us old guys are going to fall out of it, and we're going to be replaced with a new generation that didn't know the old version and is more inclined and adapted to this new digital format that they're bringing out. And that's going to happen, but it is going to create some new opportunities in the space, especially with how inexpensive self-publishing is now. We have self-publishing options that make it possible for you and me to go out and publish a game. And that wasn't really the case 20 years ago. So let me know where you think I'm right, where you think he's right. Just tell me down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys next time.